Doctor had dreamed of this moment her entire life. She stood in the grand hall of the Galactic Council, representing humanity for the first time in history. The chamber was enormous, filled with beings from 100 different worlds. Some looked like crystals that hummed with thought. Others were clouds of gas that shifted colors when they spoke. A few resembled nothing she could describe, existing in ways that hurt to look at directly. She had been assigned to the scientific committee, a position of honor for a species so new to galactic society. Her job was simple: help coordinate research between different civilizations, learn their methods, and share human discoveries. It was boring work, mostly reading reports and attending meetings, but didn't mind. Every day she learned something new about how the universe really worked. On her 43rd day at the council, made a mistake. She was searching through the research database, looking for information about cognitive diversity among species. She wanted to know how different aliens thought, how their minds solved problems in ways humans might never consider. She typed in her search terms and waited for results. The database flickered. An error message appeared, then vanished. Suddenly, files began appearing on her screen that she had never seen before. They were marked with symbols she didn't recognize, written in colors that seemed to exist outside normal space. Her translator implant struggled to make sense of them, producing words that felt wrong in her mind. At the top of the screen, in letters that seemed to burn with importance, were the words, "Cosmic Nightmare Index." Knew she should close the files immediately. These were clearly classified, far above her security level, but curiosity overwhelmed caution. She began to read. The Cosmic Nightmare Index was a ranking system, she discovered. It measured something called cognitive threat level for every species in the known galaxy. The list went back 200,000 years, tracking species that had risen and fallen, empires that had blazed bright and burned out. Each entry contained details about how that species thought, what made their minds unique, and how dangerous those thoughts could become. At the top of the list in first place were the had heard of them. They were masters of time, able to see multiple possible futures and pasts simultaneously. Their minds existed across several timelines at once, making them nearly impossible to surprise or defeat. The entry described their ability to weaponize paradoxes, to collapse probability itself into whatever form they desired. Threat level, status, monitored but stable. Scrolled down, fascinated. They were ranked third, their mathematical minds capable of calculations so complex they could predict the movement of entire star clusters. They were seventh, their artistic consciousness able to perceive reality in wavelengths other species couldn't imagine. Each entry was terrifying in its own way, describing minds so powerful they could reshape worlds with thought alone. She wondered where humans would rank. Somewhere in the middle, probably. Humans were clever and stubborn, good at solving problems and adapting to new situations. But they were young, primitive compared to species that had traveled the stars for millions of years. She began searching for Earth in the database. What she found made her blood run cold. Humanity was ranked first. Not third, not 10th, but first, above every other species in galactic history. The entry was marked with a black seal she had never seen before, a symbol that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The description was brief, which somehow made it worse. Species, Homo, cognitive classification, unbound creative synthesis. Reality constraint level, none observed. Capability projection, infinite and unpredictable. Threat level, extinction event. Current status, unaware of capacity. Recommendation, continued ignorance. Under no circumstances should this species learn of their ranking. Read it 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. Humans, the most dangerous minds in the galaxy. It made no sense. Humanity had barely reached their own moon a century ago. They still fought wars over resources and ideas. They were children compared to the ancient civilizations around them. She needed answers. Against every instinct for caution, she the file to her personal device and requested an immediate meeting with the council director. The director was a being called Shard of Thought, a crystalline entity from a species so old they had forgotten their original name. Shard of Thought had existed for over 12,000 years, serving the council for most of that time. When entered the director's office, the crystal being was hovering over a display showing star charts from the galaxy's edge. Dr. Shard of Thought said, their voice like wind chimes in a storm. "I wondered when you would find that file. I assume you have questions." His hands were shaking. "The Cosmic Nightmare Index. It says humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. That can't be right. We're barely past our own solar system. We don't have the technology, the knowledge, the power." "Sit down," Shard of Thought interrupted gently. "This conversation will take time." Sat, the crystal being shifted colors, moving through blues and purples as they gathered their thoughts. "Every species in this galaxy has imagination," Shard of Thought began. "The ability to think of things that are not immediately present, to conceive of possibilities beyond the current moment. This is not unique to humans. What is unique is the nature of your imagination." "I don't understand," said. The Shard of Thought continued, "Can imagine different timelines, but only timelines that could actually exist, variations of reality that are possible within the laws of physics. The imagine mathematical constructs, but only those that follow logical rules. The create beautiful art, but always by recombining elements they have observed in nature. Every species, without exception, has boundaries to their imagination. They can only conceive of things that are possible, even if those possibilities are strange or unlikely." The crystal being's colors darkened. "Humans have no such boundaries." Leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "You imagine impossibilities," Shard of Thought said simply. "Things that violate the laws of physics, concepts that contradict themselves, ideas so far beyond reality that they should not even be conceivable, and then, somehow, you make them real." "That's ridiculous," protested. "We can't break the laws of physics." "Can't you?" Shard of Thought gestured to the window, where ships moved between the stars. Faster-than-light travel was considered thermodynamically impossible for 300,000 years. Every species that studied it reached the same conclusion. The universe does not allow it. The energy requirements are infinite. The mathematics break down. Causality itself rebels against the concept. And yet humans, within 50 years of achieving, imagined it so vividly that you found a way around the impossible. You didn't break the laws of physics. You imagined so hard that reality bent to accommodate you." Opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Humanity had developed FTL travel faster than any other species in recorded history. The mathematics were strange, relying on principles that senior council scientists still didn't fully accept. But it worked. It shouldn't, but it did. "That's just one example," she said weakly. Shard of Thought's colors flashed red. "Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, genetic engineering, nanotechnology. Every single one of these was proven impossible by multiple civilizations before humans arrived. Proven with mathematics, with experiments, with thousands of years of research. And humans developed all of them within a single century, purely because you imagined them first and refused to accept that they couldn't exist." Crystal being moved closer. "Do you know what humans call this process? You call it science fiction. You write stories about impossible things, dream about them, play with them like toys. Other species write fiction too, but always within the bounds of possibility. Human fiction breaks every rule, violates every law, and creates concepts so strange that they shouldn't even make sense. And then your scientists read these impossible stories and think, why not? And reality somehow agrees with you." Felt dizzy. "You're saying human imagination is dangerous because we don't know what's impossible." "I'm saying human imagination is dangerous because you don't believe in impossible," Shard of Thought corrected. "Every species has limits, lines they cannot cross even in thought. Humans have no lines. You imagine infinity and then try to build it. You conceive of paradoxes and then live inside them. You dream of things that would destroy reality itself, and you do it casually, for entertainment. The director's colors shifted to a deep, sad blue. "We have been monitoring your planet for 200 years. We have read your books, watched your films, studied your art, and we are terrified, not because you are violent, though you are, not because you are ambitious, though you are. We are terrified because you imagine things we cannot conceive of and then you make them exist. You don't think outside the box. You don't believe the box is real." Sat in silence, processing this. Everything she thought she knew about humanity's place in the galaxy was wrong. They weren't the newcomers, the students learning from wise elders. They were the thing that kept those elders awake at night. "Why tell me this?" she finally asked. "Why let me see the index at all?" Shard of Thought's colors went completely dark, a color had never seen the director use before. "Because the council is fracturing. Half believe humans should be contained, your development controlled before you imagine something that destroys us all. The other half believe you could solve problems that have plagued the galaxy for eons, precisely because you don't know what's impossible. A decision must be made." "What kind of decision?" "A test," Shard of Thought said quietly. "We will present humanity with 3 impossible problems. Scenarios that have destroyed civilizations, puzzles that have no solutions. If you can imagine answers where no others could, you will be welcomed as full members of the council. If you cannot, or if your solutions prove too dangerous, humanity will be quarantined to your home system for the next 10,000 years." Stood up, her heart pounding. "And if we refuse to take this test?" "Then the decision will be made for you," Shard of Thought said, "and I suspect you will not like the outcome." Looked out the window at the stars, at the vast galactic civilization humanity had just barely joined. Somewhere out there, Earth floated in space, 7 billion people completely unaware that their entire future hung in the balance. Unaware that their imagination, their dreams, their casual ability to think impossible thoughts had marked them as the most dangerous species in known history. "When does the test begin?" she asked. "Immediately," Shard of Thought replied. "Go home, Doctor, gather your best minds, and pray that human imagination is as powerful as we fear it is. Because if it's not, if you cannot imagine solutions to the impossible, then perhaps we have been afraid of nothing all along." Left the office in a daze. The weight of an entire species rested on her shoulders now. She had to return to Earth, explain the situation, and somehow convince humanity's greatest thinkers to solve problems that had stumped galactic civilization for. She had to hope that human imagination really was as terrifying as the cosmic nightmare index claimed. She had to hope they could dream up the impossible and make it real one more time. Stood in front of the assembled group and wondered if this was really the best humanity had to offer. The conference room in Geneva was packed with people, but they seemed so ordinary. Scientists in rumpled shirts, engineers arguing over tablets, a handful of artists sketching in notebooks. In the corner, a group of children sat cross-legged on the floor, brought in specifically because someone suggested that young minds were less constrained by reality. The thought made one to laugh hysterically. Less constrained by reality. That was apparently humanity's superpower and its greatest danger. Behind her, Shard of Thought hovered silently, along with 3 other council observers. They had insisted on witnessing the test directly, to ensure humanity didn't have secret advantages hidden away. Suspected they really wanted to see if humans would fail. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," said Dr. James Park, a physicist who had helped develop Earth's FTL drives. "The entire galaxy thinks we're dangerous because we have good imaginations." "Not good," corrected. "Unbound. Every other species has mental limits on what they can conceive. We apparently don't." "That's absurd," said Commander Lisa Martinez, a military strategist included in case the problems required tactical thinking. "Imagination is just neurons firing. Everyone has it." Shard of Thought's colors shifted to a patient yellow. "If I may demonstrate, Dr. Park, imagine a color you have never seen before. not a blend of existing colors but something entirely new. James frowned in concentration. After a moment he shook his head. I can't. I can imagine combinations but not something completely new. Precisely, Shard of Thought said. Your brain cannot conceive of sensory data it has never processed. Now, imagine a number larger than infinity. That's impossible, James said. Infinity by definition has no limit. Yes, the crystal being agreed. Every species we have tested reaches the same conclusion, except humans. Shard of Thought turned toward the children. Young one, can you imagine a number bigger than infinity? A 9-year-old girl named Sarah raised her hand. Sure, infinity plus 1. That's not how mathematics works, James started to say. Why not? Sarah asked. If infinity is everything, then infinity plus 1 is everything and one more thing. It doesn't make sense, but I can imagine it. Shard of Thought's colors flickered with what might have been satisfaction or fear. That is the difference. Humans can imagine logical contradictions and treat them as valid concepts. This should not be possible. Clapped her hands together. Right. Well, we're about to find out if that's useful or not. Director, please present the first scenario. The lights dimmed. A holographic display appeared in the center of the room showing a region of space. But something was wrong with it. The stars inside the region weren't moving, weren't burning. They just existed, frozen and dead. This is the null barrier, Shard of Thought explained. An expanding region of space where physics has ceased to function. Matter does not interact, energy does not transfer, even time becomes meaningless. It has existed for 8,000 years and has consumed 17 civilizations. Every attempt to stop it has failed. Every probe sent inside has simply stopped working. The barrier expands by 1 light-year every century. In 12,000 years, it will reach a populated sector containing 30 billion souls. The room fell silent, watched her team study the display, saw the confusion and concern on their faces. This was impossible. How do you fight physics itself failing? What have other species tried? Asked Dr. Jennifer Wu, a quantum physicist. Everything, Shard of Thought replied. Energy bombardment, matter injection, attempts to restart nuclear fusion in the dead stars. The tried to reverse time inside the barrier. The tried to recalculate the fundamental constants. All failed. Physics inside the barrier does not exist in any meaningful way. You cannot fix what is not there. The team began discussing options. Force fields, containment, finding a way to evacuate the threatened civilizations. But everything they suggested had already been tried and failed. The null barrier was truly impossible to stop. Was about to call for a break when a voice spoke up from the corner. What if we don't fight it with physics? Said a science fiction novelist who wrote space operas for fun. What if we fight it with story? Everyone turned to look at him, shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. Look, I write fiction. I make up impossible things for a living. And one thing I've learned is that stories have power. They give meaning to meaningless things. They create structure where none exists. What if the problem with the null barrier isn't that physics stops working, but that reality itself loses meaning? It becomes nothing because there's no story for it to follow. That's not science, James said dismissively. So what? Shot back. We're trying to solve something that shouldn't exist. Maybe we need solutions that shouldn't work. Dr. Wu leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. Wait, that's actually interesting. In quantum mechanics, observation affects reality. The act of measuring something changes its state. What if meaning works the same way? What if reality needs context to exist? You're talking about weaponizing narrative, Commander Martinez said slowly. Creating a story so compelling that even dead space would rather follow it than remain null. That's insane, James protested. Is it? Dr. Wu pulled up her own display, fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. Quantum foam contains information at the scale. If we could embed narrative structure into that information, essentially telling reality a story about what should exist in that space. Maybe the universe would listen. It's like tricking reality into remembering what physics is supposed to be. The discussion exploded. Half the team thought it was brilliant. The other half thought it was complete nonsense. Looked at the council observers and saw their colors shifting wildly, confusion and alarm mixing together. After 3 hours of intense debate, Dr. Wu presented a theoretical framework. It involved quantum entanglement, information theory, and what she called narrative resonance patterns. It made no sense by conventional physics. It required technology that didn't exist. It assumed reality could be influenced by meaning itself. This could work, Dr. Wu concluded. I have no idea why, but the mathematics almost balance. We'd need to test it. Shard of Thought was silent for a long moment. Then quietly, we will run simulations. If they show promise, we will attempt implementation. 2 days later, the results came back. The null barrier, when exposed to the narrative resonance patterns, had slowed its expansion by 3%. It was a tiny change, but it was a change. For the first time in 8,000 years, the impossible had budged. The council observers' colors went completely white, a shade had never seen before. Second scenario, Shard of Thought said, their voice tight with something that might have been fear or wonder. If you please. The hologram changed. This time it showed a humanoid figure, frozen in mid-gesture. The figure was translucent, flickering, existing in multiple states simultaneously. This is the eternal prisoner, Shard of Thought explained. A member of the builder species, trapped in a temporal loop for over 1 billion years. They are experiencing the same moment over and over, holding knowledge that could advance civilization by. Every attempt to break the loop risks shattering causality and unmaking the universe. We have consulted the masters of time itself. They confirmed that the loop cannot be broken safely. The team stared at the impossible figure. 1 billion years of the same moment. The horror of it was overwhelming. Can they perceive anything outside the loop? Asked Commander Martinez. No, they are completely isolated within that single moment of time. Sarah, the 9-year-old, raised her hand again. Why do we need to break the loop? Can't we just join it? The room went quiet. James looked down at the child. What do you mean? If we can't pull him out, Sarah said slowly, working through the idea as she spoke, why don't we go in? Experience the same moment with him but from outside, like be in 2 times at once. That's impossible, Shard of Thought said flatly. Consciousness cannot exist in 2 temporal states simultaneously. The do it, Sarah pointed out. They are evolved for it, humans are not. But we could imagine it, Sarah insisted. And you said we can make impossible things real by imagining them hard enough. Dr. Park was already working on his tablet, running calculations. She's right. Not about the mechanics, that's still impossible. But if we could develop a consciousness transfer protocol that lets us enter the loop, experience it alongside the prisoner, and extract information during that shared moment, then exit before the loop resets. We wouldn't be breaking causality because we'd never actually change the loop itself. That violates every principle of temporal mechanics, Shard of Thought protested. Good, Dr. Wu said with a wild grin. If it followed the rules, it wouldn't work. The rules are what created the problem. The team spent 4 days designing something that shouldn't exist. A device that would let consciousness exist in 2 times at once, that would allow communication across a temporal barrier, that would extract information from an unchangeable moment. Every equation they wrote contradicted the previous one. Every principle they invoked canceled out the others. It was completely illogical. It worked. The first test subject entered the loop, existed alongside the eternal prisoner for that single frozen moment, learned 3,000 years' worth of builder technology, and exited cleanly. The loop remained intact. Causality remained stable. The impossible had been done. The council observers said nothing. They simply shifted through colors so rapidly it looked like static, like reality itself glitching at what they had witnessed. Third scenario, Shard of Thought finally said, their voice barely audible. Final test. This hologram was different. It showed a massive structure, geometric and perfect, floating in empty space. It seemed to exist in more dimensions than could perceive, angles that hurt to follow, surfaces that reflected things that weren't there. The architect's engine, Shard of Thought said. It can reshape reality itself. Stars, planets, physical laws all can be altered at will. 17 species have accessed it. 9 destroyed themselves in civil wars within days. 8 became so stagnant, creating such perfect utopias that they stopped evolving and faded from existence. The engine is power absolute, and every species that has found it has failed to survive it. The director's colors went dark. We will give humanity access to the engine. You may study it, understand it, even use it if you choose. But know this, every species before you has been destroyed by this choice. Either they fought over the power, or they misused it, or they became dependent on it. The engine is not a test of imagination. It is a test of wisdom. The room erupted in argument immediately. Commander Martinez wanted to secure the engine militarily. Dr. Park wanted to study it scientifically, wanted to catalog all the things it could create. The discussion grew heated, voices rising, people talking over each other. Felt sick. This was exactly what Shard of Thought had predicted. Humanity was already fracturing over power they didn't even have yet. Then a quiet voice spoke up. "We don't use it," said Doctor, a poet who had been silent through most of the testing. "We don't use it at all." The argument stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. "Explain," said. Stood up slowly. "The problem isn't the engine, it's the choice. Every species that found it saw it as a tool to be used or a weapon to be controlled. They saw power and tried to claim it. But we're human. We imagine impossible things every day and then don't make them real. We dream of horrors and don't commit them. We conceive of world-ending weapons and then choose not to build them." She walked to the hologram, staring at the impossible structure. The real power isn't in reshaping reality. It's in imagining infinite realities and having the wisdom to leave them imaginary. We should understand the engine completely, map every possibility it offers, imagine every single thing it could do. And then we should choose, deliberately and consciously, to walk away. "That's wasteful," Commander Martinez protested. "That's survival," countered. "Don't you see? The other species failed because they couldn't imagine having power and not using it. They couldn't conceive of that possibility. But we can. We can hold infinite contradictory thoughts simultaneously. We can imagine reshaping the universe and imagine leaving it alone, both at the same time, and choose between them." James was staring at her with something like awe. "She's right. The test isn't whether we can use the engine. It's whether we can imagine using it perfectly, understand it completely, and then have the discipline to say no." The council observers had gone completely still. Shard of Thought's colors were cycling through shades that had no names, emotions that couldn't be translated. "You would refuse this power?" the director finally asked. "Not refuse," said, understanding flooding through her. "We would choose. Every day, every moment, we would choose not to use it, not because we can't imagine the benefits, but because we can imagine all the consequences too, even the ones that contradict each other, even the ones that don't make logical sense. We can hold all of that in our minds at once and make a decision anyway." Shard of Thought was silent for a very long time. Then slowly, the crystal being's colors shifted to a deep, reverent gold. "The test is complete," Shard of Thought said, "and humanity has passed." The full council gathered for the first time in 3 centuries. The enormous chamber was filled with representatives from 1,000 worlds, beings of every description imaginable and some that weren't. They floated, crawled, phased through solid matter, existed in states between dimensions. The greatest minds in galactic civilization had come to witness this moment. Stood at the center of it all, feeling very small and very human. Shard of Thought addressed the assembly, their voice resonating through the chamber in a way that bypassed sound entirely. The human test has concluded. They have demonstrated capabilities beyond our measurements. They solved the null barrier by weaponizing narrative structure. They freed the eternal prisoner by choosing to exist in logical contradiction. And they passed the ultimate test by imagining infinite power and choosing to refuse it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Colors shifted, gases swirled, the very air seemed to vibrate with reaction. But there is more you must know, Shard of Thought continued. Information that even Doctor was not cleared to access until this moment. The Council itself was not founded by us. We are merely its inheritors. The true founders were the precursors, a species that transcended physical reality 2 million years ago. They left behind the Cosmic Nightmare Index not as a threat assessment, but as a prediction algorithm. A hologram appeared above the assembly, showing data streams couldn't begin to comprehend. The precursors discovered a universal constant in cognitive evolution. Every species, upon reaching a certain threshold of imagination, faces what they call the filter, the point where their ability to imagine outpaces their wisdom to control it. Most species die at the filter, destroyed by their own thoughts. Some survive by limiting themselves, becoming less than they could be. Shard of Thought's colors went completely dark. The precursors predicted that one species would eventually emerge that could pass through the filter unchanged. A species that could imagine infinite possibilities without being destroyed by them. A species whose imagination was terrifying precisely because it had no limits, but also wasn't enslaved by its own limitlessness. The director turned to face directly. Humanity is that species, and the precursors left instructions for when you emerged. The council was to offer you not membership but stewardship. The chamber exploded in noise. Protests, arguments, fear, and anger mixing together in a cacophony that made translator implant scream in overload. She saw the delegation simply vanish, unable to accept this reality. Others looked ready to fight. Silence, Shard of Thought's voice cut through the chaos. The precursor's logic was clear. They understood that imagination is the most dangerous force in the universe, and that it must be guided carefully. Humans will become the guardians of imagination itself, helping other species develop their creative capacities without destroying themselves. They will mediate the boundary between what can be imagined and what should be made real. And what if we refuse this role? Asked quietly. She was tired of being told what humanity was without being asked what humanity wanted. Shard of Thought's colors shifted to a warm, sad blue. Then you will be left alone, and the galaxy will continue as it has for 2 million years. Stable, safe, and forever limited. But I think you will not refuse, because humans do not see power as something to claim. They see it as a responsibility to fulfill. Looked out at the assembly. She saw fear there and resentment, but also hope. Species that had existed for millions of years, solving the same problems in the same ways, trapped in patterns of thought they couldn't break. They needed something different. They needed someone who could imagine the impossible. "We'll do it," said, "but not alone. You said every species has unique ways of thinking and creating. Our job won't be to control imagination or limit it. We'll help every species unlock their full creative potential safely. Because the scary thing about human imagination isn't that it's infinite. It's that we believe everyone else's could be too." The chamber fell silent again. Then slowly colors began shifting. Gases swirled in patterns of acceptance. Crystalline beings chimed in harmony. One by one, the species of the council agreed. Not because they weren't afraid of human imagination anymore, but because they were starting to imagine what they could become if they stopped being afraid. Within a year, the first Imagination Academy opened on a neutral station near the galactic core. Humans worked alongside mathematicians, teaching them to imagine equations that broke their own rules. Artists collaborated with, creating works that depicted things that couldn't exist. Engineers learned from how to imagine across time, while teaching the how to imagine beyond possibility. The Cosmic Nightmare Index was repurposed. Instead of ranking threats, it now tracked creative potential. Every species in the galaxy gained access, able to see where their imagination could grow, what boundaries they had unknowingly accepted, what impossible things they might learn to dream. And in the deepest archives of the Council, Shard of Thought added a final note to humanity's file. Threat level extinction, but not for civilizations, for limitations themselves. They imagine a universe without boundaries, and they are teaching the rest of us to believe it too. The precursors were right to fear them, and right to trust them. Humanity's greatest weapon was never violence or technology. It was the simple, terrifying ability to ask, "What if?" and refuse to accept impossible as an answer. Sometimes stood on the observation deck of the academy, watching students from 100 worlds work together. She saw a young calculate a probability so unlikely it shouldn't exist, then laugh with delight when it worked anyway. She watched and paint colors that had never been seen before, colors that violated physics but existed anyway through sheer creative will. She observed imagine a timeline that contradicted itself and hold both versions in their minds simultaneously, a feat their species had never managed. They were learning to think like humans, not to replace their own ways of thinking, but to expand them, to add impossibility to their toolbox of thought. And somewhere, like to imagine, the precursors were watching, those ancient beings who had transcended reality itself, who had predicted this moment 2 million years ago. She imagined them smiling, if they still had anything like smiles, satisfied that their long plan had finally come to fruition. She imagined them welcoming humanity to the ranks of those who had passed through the filter unchanged, those rare species who could hold infinity in their thoughts and not be crushed by it. And then, because she was human, imagined something even more impossible. She imagined a future where every species in the galaxy passed through the filter, where every mind became unbound, every thought unlimited, every dream achievable, where the phrase, "that's impossible," became an invitation rather than a barrier. It was a ridiculous dream. It contradicted everything known about cognitive evolution. It would take millions of years and might not even be possible. But imagined it anyway. And because she was human, because her species had been marked as the most terrifying force in the known universe, because her imagination had no boundaries and no limits and no respect for the rules reality tried to impose, she imagined it so vividly and so completely that the universe itself began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, it could be true. After all, that was what humans did. They imagined the impossible and then made reality doubt itself. They dreamed up things that couldn't exist and then convinced existence to accommodate them. They were the cosmic nightmare that the galaxy had feared, the cognitive threat that nothing could defend against. But they were also the hope that had waited 2 million years to arrive. And they were just getting started.